You know, I was on the Maybach music group tour buses through like college towns, jumping off to do commercials and, you know, calling my wife with my newborn, thinking like, she may not believe when I tell her now I'm going to own my own big monster company anymore. Like, this isn't adding up, but it did.
All right. It's Thursday, February 3rd. It is 2022, as the show notes like to remind me. This is episode 201 of the Token CEO podcast. I'm Erika Nardini. I'm the CEO of Barstool Sports. We are dedicating this episode to the great or not so great resignation. So we are on a resignation spree over here at Barstool Sports. I think it's pretty much true of every company. I actually was at the WWE last week for their board session. We talked about the Great Resignation. I'm so tired of that phrase, actually. But then I had this Carrie Bradshaw moment in the middle of the night last night where I'm like, is it such a great resignation? So Lorenzo, who's on our podcast, has resigned from us. So womp womp, Lorenzo's moving on. We also have one of our most talented people at the company, Jen Simons, who runs our production group. She is making a life change and moving to California. Deirdre has a great phrase that she always likes to remind me about, which is it's not just how you enter a company that's important, but it's really how you leave a company that matters. So we're going to talk about resigning today. All right. So before we get into that, we are going to talk about cupcakes, because when you are thinking about your job, leaving your job, your boss leaving your job, someone you depend on leaving their job, you really need something, and it may as well be a cupcake. So what's awesome about Baked by Melissa is that it's a woman-owned business. Melissa Ben Ashay is a mom. She's a baker, and she's the founder of Baked by Melissa. They've got an incredible Valentine's Day assortment. So if you love someone, or you really hope your boss doesn't quit, or there's someone who works for you who you think matters, buy them some dessert. You can choose your arrival date. You can choose your flavor. They've got an amazing flavor selection, including marshmallow, creamy milk chocolate, decadent dulce de leche, and many others. If you go to bakedbymelissa.com, you can order your Valentine's Day gifts, or the boss I love you gifts, or the person don't quit on me gifts today. The resignation. Let's talk about the resignation. So Lorenzo left us. My first question for you, Lorenzo, which I'm going to put you on the spot, is why do people not say where they're going when they resign sometimes? I think that is one of the most irritating things as a manager. And I don't understand it, and I would like to understand it. So Lorenzo, can you give me your one, congratulations on getting a new job and leaving the funny farm, but two, why is it that people don't tell people where they're going?
So there's two reasons why. One is there's one more thing that just needs to be finalized on their end. So I just wanted to make sure that's done. And two, as a personal thing, I have always kept this practice because I am very superstitious and I don't want to jinx things.
So even if you've signed a job offer, you're not telling just in case something falls through?
Yes. And this is like a everywhere in my life kind of thing. I don't say the thing. I don't put it into the universe until it's actually happening.
Okay, got it. Yeah. See, we had this happen. We had this guy who worked for us who he had a really critical job. He worked in the finance team. He was very critical, and not critical as a person, but like kind of an integral role. And he left and would not say where he was going. He wouldn't tell HR. He wouldn't tell his boss. He wouldn't tell other people. He wouldn't tell me. And then it became like, where is he going became the thing. Now, I'll tell you from a manager point of view, I'm going to know where you went anyways, because it's going to be on your LinkedIn. So I think it's just a funny dynamic. I completely respect the privacy part of it, but I also think it's one of these funny things about leaving, where when you leave a place, the person leaving probably feels relief, a little bit of trepidation, victory, I think excitement over what's next. I think a manager feels like a little bit of panic, some annoyance. You could be irritated. You could also be relieved. And then you're like, oh shit, I've got to get my act together on what's next. And I always just wonder if the like hiding the place where you're going does that add tension in an already emotional conversation? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I can see where that happens. But I hope not. And I'm trying to make the transition as like
Yeah.
effortless and smooth as possible. And I'm trying not to bring emotion into it. And my weird superstitions, I think, are just kind of like one of my little things. And I use it a lot in work when I have a certain project. Like I don't like counting my eggs before they're hatched kind of thing.
I think that makes total sense. The thing that blew about this guy was that he went to work for a competitor, which I find tacky. So I'm going to say the same thing about you if you go to a competitor. But if you're like, hey, I'm just doing a new thing and I want to do it and I don't want to jinx it, I get don't want to jinx mentality. So I think that the net on this piece of it is that it's really personal and it's very situational. People leave jobs for all sorts of reasons. Obviously, people are leaving jobs in droves right now, but also people are coming into jobs in droves right now. So it's a lot of peopleness. Like it's some days it works, some ways it works, some situations work, some don't. So that's interesting. Rachel, let's just talk about how you're feeling, because I feel like you, to me, embody the millennial angst. So how are you feeling? Like your boss is leaving, your boss's boss is leaving.
Just a little bit of like overwhelm. Like I'm just thinking about like all of the things that Lorenzo has been doing, and also the ways that like Lorenzo also has been using Jen, and the way that Jen works with us, and the fact that they're both leaving now on the same day is very like, okay, so if they're not going to do it, who's going to do it? Because now it's just me and Mackenzie, and now me and Mackenzie are like, well, we're busy all the time already. So how are we going to fill in the cracks? But now we have someone who's going to help, which is exciting, but it's still just very like, I don't know. I feel like we had just like gotten to such a good place where like Mackenzie's doing a good job with like producing the show, the YouTube, like our social is like, I feel really like good. Lorenzo's lane is like really good of like producing the show. And like, we were just kind of like getting going. And now it's like, I feel like we're like taking steps back now, not because of like who's coming to do it, but just because it's like, okay, we got to like,
it's new.
Get someone back up and like that kind of thing. So I'm just like, and also I'm just sad. Like I love Lorenzo and Jen.
Yeah, no, I think it's super sad. I also think it's a great opportunity for change. Like it can be really overwhelming. And, my advice to people who are experiencing people who work for them leave is a couple things. One is it's okay to be overwhelmed, right? Whether it's your boss is leaving or people who work for you that are leaving, it's okay to be overwhelmed. I think the second piece of it is you got to take it one step at a time, and you've got to be really organized. So, in my case, it's like, all right, what does Jen Simons do at Barstool Sports? What is unique to just Jen Simons? What can't be replaced that she does? What's going to fall in my lap? What's going to fall in Dave's lap? What's going to fall through the cracks? What do I think is going to fall through the cracks? Then I think the second piece is, who's left on the bus? Like who is on the bus right now? And how do you make someone's departure an opportunity for growth? I think the difference in a Lorenzo leaving, Lorenzo hasn't been at Barstool very long. Jen's been with me for 5 years. So, and I think the differences there are like, oh gosh, like who's on Jen's bus? Who wants to take Jen's seat? What should that look like? And then I think the third piece is, if you can really be deft in how you handle those conversations, you're going to see people who really have the opportunity to rise and shine, and people who want to take on new things. And then the other piece of it is, I think you'll find things that didn't really make sense. Like I was having a transition conversation today, and it was like, well, these two people do the same thing, but they report to different people and they don't really get along. And I'm like, well, no shit, they don't get along, because they're competing for the same job, basically. Why don't they have the same job? So I think those are all things that are just part of the transition process. And then obviously, I think whether you've been at a company a long time and you're running a big org, or you've been at a company a short time and you were just making your way there, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the communication of like, hey, you want to leave things in a great place or in a good place. And then you also want to give yourself a breather and, take some space before you start the next thing. I think one of the hardest things I used to I feel like I've been at Barstool forever, but before Barstool, I changed jobs probably every 2 years. And I always got a little worried because I was still tired from leaving and joining the last job, that when I went to the next job, then I like started tired. So you also want to give yourself a good break so that when you started a new job, you start on the right foot and you start fresh. You don't come in with the baggage or the annoyances or just the hangover or PTSD, quite honestly, of what you were doing before. So we got a lot of great stories. We'll post some of them on our social. Most of them are people complaining about how much their boss sucked and why they were glad to basically stick it to their boss. Do you agree with that, Rach?
Yeah, a lot of them were, or just like they didn't feel like they were treated well. Can I ask you a question that doesn't necessarily need to make it on the podcast, but like, so with like Lorenzo leaving, Jen and like Mikey last week, like coming out saying that he's leaving, like, how does that kind of make you feel about like the state of things? Like, cause I don't know if that's just like a weird coincidence that's going on like this month or something, but like what's going on?
That's a great question. So one, it's not a coincidence. Everyone got paid last week. So this is the time of year where you leave, right? You get your bonus you're an idiot if you leave before your bonus hits, let's be honest. Or your job, sorry, you may not be an idiot, but your job is intolerable if you're leaving before your bonus hits. So obviously, when the bonuses from the year before hit, you're free and clear. You don't want to tell your boss before the bonus hits because you don't want to get a lesser bonus, which is what I'm experiencing. But you also want to time your departure to that time because it's pretty unlikely that the company you're going to is going to pay you last year's bonus for next year's work, right? So I don't think it's a coincidence. I do think that there are a couple things that happen to a company like ours and companies in general. One is that for people who've been here a long time, in Jen's case, Jen's moving to California, right? She wants to, when we talked about her leaving, she cried and the only thing she really talked about was her family. So in Jen's case, she's really making a big life change. She's moving from the East Coast to the West Coast. She wants to be closer to her family. She's been isolated from them for the entire pandemic. So I think there's a lot of those type of like life first type of changes. And she found a job that's great because she's supremely talented and awesome. And she's worked here, let's be honest, for 5 years, which is like dog years. So she's really worked here for, 100 years. In the case of Mikey, that's a different type of scenario where I think when you're in your 20s and 30s and you're really passionate about a certain thing or a certain space, that companies come knocking. The bigger Barstool Sports has become, the faster we've grown, the more our people get picked off by other companies because this is a great place to recruit, right? You want someone who has built something fast, who understands consumers, who understands monetization, who understands the internet, who understands IP, and can do whatever the job may be, a sales job, a programming job, a production job. This is a great place to recruit from, right? We see that in talent, we see that on the business side and on the production side. And I also think there's a time where you're like, fuck it, like I'm toiling around in the trenches at this company. I want to go make a big equity play. I want to take a swing. I'm going to bet on myself. And that's kind of the place Mikey was in. And then I think on the Lorenzo example of it all is you're like, hey, maybe this wasn't a fit for me. Like I really love news or I really love doing X. And this job didn't have as much of that as I thought, or it was irritating, or it wasn't set up, it was different than what I expected going in. So I think we're in a period right now where we're a very, very desirable company to recruit from. 2 is we have 3 instances which are going to happen to us all day long. People who've been here for a long time, who want to make a life change or who are ready for the next big thing. People who want to break out of the pack and bet on themselves, or people who came in and were like, ooh, I thought I liked you guys, or I thought this was right for me and it wasn't. And I think, the biggest thing that I always worry about is exactly your question, which is, do people like what's going on? And it's like, what's going on is that like, there's a lot of jobs out there. There's a lot of equity being thrown around. There's a lot of people wanting to make a life change in the pandemic, right? I understand all those things. I also am an optimist and I'm like, okay, that's going to suck. That's going to suck for me. I may have to change the way I'm doing some things. We have to think about doing things differently. But if you look at even this podcast, like Bryn, so Bryn is one of my favorite people. She produces Starting 9 and Section 10. I've loved Bryn forever. I have this executive coach who I work with who oddly knows about Bryn. And every day is like, how's Bryn? And I'm like, I get asked about Bryn more than I get asked about anyone in this company. But
Really?
yeah, it's so funny.
That's so funny.
It was really cute. I think he doesn't understand proportion. So he was like, could Bryn take Jen Simon's job? I was like, I don't think Bryn's exactly ready for Jen Simon's job yet, but amazing that you think so highly of her.
Wow.
I know.
Good to know. Insight.
But I also think it's a cool thing of here's Bryn. She's someone who's been at Barstool. She's worked with, talent for a while. She's done a great job on the shows that she's worked on. And she's like, I'm hand raising because I want a new opportunity. And that to me is what's so exciting is like in Jen leaving, I had 5 Slacks today of like, hey, can I get a one-on-one? I want to step up. I want to do more. And that's what's exciting. Change, you can't prevent change. You can't stifle people from going to do what makes them happy, but you can embrace like, all right, maybe we should just try doing it differently. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, I was going to say too, I primarily worked with Jared also, who's going through that process right now.
Same transition.
Yeah. Like, do I bet on myself? Do I, go for something different? But also like, I learned a lot from him too. And it's like, you can create your own destiny, especially at Barstool. So it's like, this was yesterday. I texted Jen or Blackman about it. And then today, like I'm in record, like that's just how it works here.
Literally, I had a one-on-one with Jen at 11:30. It's 12:49. At 11:55, I was like, okay, great. I'm starting recording at 12. Is Bryn free?
Right.
So it's like, that's the glory of this place, which is, this is how it works. But Jared's another great example. Like, I think it made the show last week. Like we talked about Jared last week, like Jared's at a massive crossroads, right? Jared's like, do I want to go stand alone or is it more comfortable in the nest? And like, that's a hard question because there are pros, there's pros and cons to both. Like Mikey Fowler right now is sitting over at whatever, Greg Olson's company is with Peter Morris. And it's probably like the honeymoon phase. It feels amazing, but I also am sure he's like, ooh, I'm missing my friends. I'm missing the comfort. I'm missing the infrastructure. So, no job is perfect, right? No person is perfect. No job is perfect. No situation is perfect. So you got to work to make it what you want right at that time. Sorry, that was a little bit of a ramble from a boardroom perspective. Here's what we're doing today. We have Q&A as always, which we love. We have an awesome interview with Rich Kleiman. I loved Rich Kleiman. I felt him to be honest and genuine and just very affable and real. He leads 35 Ventures. This is a venture project, as he would call it, with his partner, Kevin Durant. Rich is a college dropout. He's a native New Yorker, and he stumbled upon a relationship with Kevin Durant where he became Kevin Durant's manager. He worked for Wale. He worked in the music business for a while. He obviously then worked in the sports business. Kevin and Rich created a venture firm that now is quite progressive in investing in crypto and other platforms. And we talk about his journey, and we really talk specifically about a question central to any company or any investment, which is something a hobby or is something a business? I sit on the WWE board with a gentleman named Steve Koonin, who came out of Turner. He's the CEO of Atlanta Hawks. He and I had a 22-minute one-on-one last week, and he was saying to me, which I love, like when you meet, like I feel like when you talk to someone who's a legend in a space and who's way more experienced than you, you're like, oh, give it to me. And he like gave it to me in literally 17 minutes. But his thing was, are you doing hobbies. Do you have hobbies or do you have businesses? And I think this is a really good question that I'm thinking about a lot for Barstool. But I think that is also true of entrepreneurs like Rich, where they are starting to think about what are the companies that he and KD invest in versus what is the projects they're incubating or developing on their own, which may just be that, hobbies and projects. So that's a really good discussion. And we'll talk a little bit about hobbies versus businesses before we get into his interview. Before we do that, though, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Spotify, Neil Young, Joe Rogan, truth around COVID, you name it. So this has been all over the news. Let's just set the stage. So Spotify, I believe, is a $30 billion company, publicly traded, run by a Swedish gentleman named Daniel Ek. Spotify has 172 million paying subscribers. That's up from 144 million, which is the number they had when they signed Rogan. So because of Joe Rogan, because of a lot of the investments they're making, because of the nature of the platform themselves, they've grown from 144 million to 172 million subs. And this was as of Q3 2021. They have over 3 million podcasts on Spotify. So what's interesting about this is that Spotify is a business that makes money from music labels and artists. Because they have to pay artists, and the more music is played, the more they have to pay artists, Spotify needed to diversify its content strategy and also its revenue stream. Podcasts are far higher margin than music because Spotify doesn't have to split the money with the record label. All they need to do is either to launch their own brands or to pay money to big hosts like Call Her Daddy or Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's deal is a reported $100 million deal. So Spotify is not going to fuck around with Joe Rogan. One, he's bringing them subscribers. Two, he's making them relevant as a podcast platform. Three, he's diversifying their revenue stack. And four, when people listen to podcasts on networks or platforms like Spotify, they tend to be more engaged and they tend to spend more time. When you listen to a podcast, and in particular Joe Rogan's podcast, you're engaging with Spotify for 3+ hours at a time. So podcasting commands more time spent and more attention, and also more money to Spotify's bottom line, which is why it's so important for them. Spotify has spent over $1 billion acquiring podcasts and podcast technology. So they bought Parcast, they bought Gimlet Media, they bought The Ringer, they've done Rogan, they did Call Her Daddy. So they've been spending to essentially vertically integrate podcasting. So everything from creation, which is the creation of IP and podcasts that will run exclusive on Spotify, to the monetization of podcasting. This is the technology that enables advertisers to run across all of Spotify's podcasts targeted to all different types of audiences and with very I would say with systematic and templatized ads. And then they've paid money for big name talent. So this is not really, frankly, any different than what YouTube did or what Facebook attempted to do. What's interesting about Rogan is that Rogan is constantly in the line of fire. And there's a lot of opinion and emotion about COVID and about Joe Rogan. And I think this is actually what makes Joe Rogan so interesting is you can't deny his curiosity. You can't deny his preparedness. You can't deny the way he interviews controversial figures or counterculture figures. But what essentially has happened is that by virtue of who Rogan is interviewing, so in this case, two very controversial scientists, Dr. Malone and Dr. McCullough, it has created a backlash really of folk artists who are leaving Spotify's platform because they do not want to be on a platform that spreads misinformation about COVID-19 or vaccination really at large. So I think what's interesting about this is both how Rogan's responding to it as well as how Spotify's responding to it. So from a Rogan perspective, at first he didn't say anything. You also have to acknowledge he's crushing it in terms of the billions of media impressions he's getting right now. Everybody's talking about Joe Rogan. That's good for Joe Rogan. If you're in the Joe Rogan business, people talking about Joe Rogan, good or bad, is a good thing. he finally responded on Instagram. He made a video talking about how he, lo and behold, the podcast has gotten quite big, and he has a responsibility to be very balanced and frankly, more balanced in the people he features. You've got Spotify creating a COVID-19 information hub, which, let's face it, is a PR stunt and is really meant to stem the tide of more artists boycotting Spotify. And then finally, you've got folk singers. You've got Neil Young, you've got Joni Mitchell. I think you have the guitarist for Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. You've got them boycotting Spotify. I think the biggest thing here is that the artists kind of woke up and said, ooh, if we don't like something, we can boycott and make a lot of noise. I think Rogan kind of woke up and said, ooh, God, and this is something we think about, but even tiptoeing into conversations about vaccination and COVID is extremely dangerous. And then finally, I think Spotify is finding itself extremely uncomfortably at the crux of free speech and misinformation, which I think is super fascinating. And it's going to be something it's something that we're just at the beginning of. Okay, so that's the Joe Rogan, Spotify, misinformation, free speech vortex for today. Before we get into the rest of the episode, the Olympics are kicking off this week. We recently interviewed some of the members of the U.S. women's hockey team. You should follow them on Instagram if you're not already. They're basically posting daily videos of being in the bread line at the cafeteria, which really just confirms for me that these are my girls. They're in Beijing. They're defending their gold medal title. You should go back and listen to that interview if Brianna Decker, Amanda Kessel, Megan Keller, or any of the women of the women's hockey team, the U.S. women's hockey team, that is, catches your fancy. And then I would be remiss if I didn't promote our daily newsletter. So our daily newsletter is called Things You Missed. It's a roundup of everything that's happened throughout the day, from news to what's trending on Twitter to what's going viral. You can subscribe at barstool.link/TYM. Now that we've done all that, it's clearly time for a high noon. Tom Brady resigned this week. I was sad about it. I'm sad that he's only talking about the Buccaneers. Dave Portnoy thinks that he's got something else up his sleeve, and maybe we'll go back to the Pats and give them their due for being the place that launched the GOAT, giving a shout out to my guy, Bill Belichick. But mostly I was just noticing Dave's High Noon hat. So High Noon is a hard seltzer. It's made with real vodka, real juice, and sparkling water. It's made not with malt. It's made with true real vodka. Amen to that. They keep it real, just like Barstool Sports. It's the perfect drink to watch during the Olympics, during your pre-party, or when watching football. So head over to your liquor store or your local grocery store and get yourself some High Noon today. Okay, all right, so let's hit the Q&A, my favorite part of this episode. Question number one, what would be an appropriate and professional way to ask if an internship can possibly lead to a job offer? And ask this during the interview. Is this something I should and shouldn't ask? All right, so this person is interviewing for an internship and wants to know, hey, if I'm going to work for you for peanuts all summer or all fall or whenever it may be over winter break, doesn't matter. Is this job going to turn into a full-time position? I think it is completely okay to ask that question. I would ask it, though, in this way. I would say, what percentage of interns turn into full-time hires? I would maybe also say something like, what are the qualifications of the people who've transitioned from being interns to being full-time employees? What do those qualifications look like? What do the people at the end of the summer or the end of the term or the end of the period, what are they doing? What do they have? What have they demonstrated? What have they done that makes them a candidate for a full-time position? You may then also want to ask a follow-up question of how many of these people are still at this company now? I think it's very good to ask because hopefully, let's be honest, you have your choice of internships and ultimately you want a job. So you want to understand how your internship can ideally and most easily get you a job at that company. If the company doesn't tend to hire from internships, you may want to intern at another company, or you just need to go into it knowing that you're going to do the internship, There's a small chance you may get a job after it, and you're going to need to package up those skills and pitch yourself for a job elsewhere. Question number 2 is, what's your advice when I've been given an offer letter, I signed it and accepted it, but the company is keeping me in limbo on the start date? I put in my 2 weeks for my previous job, but I'm on one of my last days and I'm concerned that there's no start date for the new one. Yikes. I think this is a problem. One is you want to be sure that there's a start date. So if you're listening to this, I would call the hiring manager and or the HR recruiter that you worked with in joining the new company. And I would say, hey, is this just an oversight that there isn't a start date? Or is there a delay on the start date of this position? I think it's really bad form that this company has put you in limbo. You're literally about to be in limbo. It's not like if the start date gets pushed out 3 months that you can go back to your last job. I think your previous manager might have a problem with that. So I think what I would do in this situation is start communicating pretty quickly with the new company. And I would get to the truth, not aggressively or in a hostile or an accusing manner, but I would get to the truth of, hey, when is the start date for this position? Is there a problem? Is there a reason behind this delay? Is this an oversight, or is something actually happening inside the company that it would be good for you to know about? I would get that answer first and foremost. Once you have that answer, hopefully it's just an oversight and you'll start lickety split. Maybe you'll get a week on the beach in between. But if there is a problem, then come back to us and let's talk about what we do next. Are you going to want to go back to your last position? Are you going to want to take a break? Do you have enough money to do that and find something new altogether? Let's talk about what we learn once they answer that question for you. And hopefully by the time you listen to this, you've actually started. All right, so that's Q&A. Let's give a quick shout out to CVS. So I don't know if you've been in a CVS recently. I can find myself getting lost in a CVS. I don't like the smell of CVS particularly, which is probably not something I should say right now, but it's true. CVSs have a smell. Every department store and every drugstore has a smell, but CVS in particular has a smell. The okay thing about that is CVS is the only place where you can find our new men's grooming line. So our new men's grooming line is called Wood. They have products for your hair, for your body, for your beard, and to shave with. They help men look their best, smell their best, and feel their best. We made this product with some of the best product and fragrance designers in the world. It's for the guy who knows his best life doesn't just come to him. He has to go out and find it. I would also say that if you're a woman like me, you could use this product too, and maybe you'll unleash that inner guy inside of you. Wood works and smells as good as it looks. You can have Golden Hour, Summer House, or Fresh Tracks, and you can find it only at CVS. So our guest today is Rich Kleiman. I loved Rich Kleiman. He's the founder of 35 Ventures. He launched this venture platform with his friend and client, Kevin Durant. 35 Ventures is building a media business. They're an investment firm. They're focused on sports. They believe in entertainment, obviously. They invest in a whole host of different companies and have an entire wing dedicated to charity. They've led early investments in Coinbase, Whoop, Lime Bikes, and other companies that are thus far bringing in big returns. Rich is a hustler. He's worked hard. He dropped out of college, but he worked his way up into music and into managing people you may know like Wale. And then he's led that into managing Kevin Durant and now building his own venture firm. Here's our conversation. Okay, so why is your company called 35 Ventures?
Well, Kevin's number historically has been 35.
That makes sense.
I don't think we had any real idea that we would build a business outside of the two of us doing entrepreneurial things. So it felt like it wasn't necessarily supposed to be ventures in the form of venture capital as much. It was like everything we do is a venture.
Sure.
So let's just kind of create a business and we'll name it 35 Ventures. It actually started to have a bit more meaning, I think, when he changed his number to 7, because for me, I actually was like it was a bit emotional because like that was the defining number
Yeah,
in my
you're like,
mind.
what the fuck, bro?
Kevin brand.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then I realized it was an opportunity to create it as its like own thing, bigger than an athlete venture fund, which was a stigma probably.
Yeah, no, I got you. Okay, so explain who you are, what you do, and what's one thing nobody knows about you.
Okay, well, my name is Rich Kleiman, born and raised New Yorker, and I am a manager by trade. So I'm Kevin Durant's manager and agent, but an entrepreneur truly by nature. So that partnership that Kevin and I formed allowed us to start building a business in the name of the two of us. And that's media, that's investments, that's brand. And I guess one thing you wouldn't know about me, man, I'm a pretty open book.
Okay, I got one. Are your teeth real or not?
No.
They look great.
So the teeth actually came from the pandemic as well. The pandemic.
You are just having a revival.
Well, the thing I think that happened, as we all can attest to, is like it was a pretty weird dynamic because you were torn, like emotionally. You know, the world was falling apart, and you knew people that were sick, but at the same time, depending on your business and depending on where you were in the world, it could have been a really powerful time. And I think for me, not only did our business grow, but I spent so much time on Zoom that I got so vain, and I hated it. But I was staring at my teeth every day, and I was like, well, these aren't that bad, but that chipped tooth I got in high school from playing basketball doesn't look the way it did when I was in college, and I thought it was cool. And then I just got down a rabbit hole, and I was like, why would I not invest in these teeth? So I did it. I'm not going to lie.
Good for
I went
you.
all in.
They look great. I think the pandemic was like one of the most life-affirming periods ever, where it just separated everyone. Like there were the fear mongers and the like paranoids, and then there were the victims who got depressed, and putting aside people who were sick, because it's like everybody gets a pass if they're sick. But then I feel like there was a group of people who were forced to look at their circumstance, whether it's like how your teeth look on Zoom, what your relationships are like, where you work, what you do, like, and then we're like, fuck, I'm going to change it. So I love that. I think it's like, I went to college with this guy who had this like New Jersey, only the strong survive. But I feel like the pandemic was like only the strong survive.
Yeah. Or only, I totally agree with you on that. And also, I think it was pretty clear that things that were important quickly seemed very unimportant.
Yeah.
And then you had to kind of redefine like what you stood on. So it was like, do you love your work? Okay, cool. Can you find a purpose in your work? Yeah. So I'm going to attack it. I'm going to get better. Do you love your family? Yeah. So I'm going to be more present than ever. Yep. It's like nothing bad can come out of that.
Yep.
But like we were all scared, but we all have like a certain zest for life, which I definitely like was aware of during that time, because there was like a 3-week period I remember in the early pandemic where like, when you got exposed and you had these crazy rules in the beginning. So it's like my wife's mom happened to go into the city, so we couldn't see her for like 14 days.
Yeah, it was crazy, ridiculous. Right? As you're like sanitizing the Amazon boxes and you're like, what the fuck am I doing right now? Completely. Okay. So you guys are known most for the foresight you had around Coinbase, the way you've thought about investing in combination of crypto and media and entertainment. Like, talk a little bit about your investing philosophy, how you think about ventures. As like, we have a bunch of people who listen to this show who are like, I'm somewhere in my career, I'd like to be somewhere else that's better than this. Talk a little bit about how you see the world and how you put your energy into it, and then obviously the money from you and KD into growing companies that exist within it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I see all of this kind of world that we're in. Like, I could explain what I think works, and then to somebody else's business is totally irrelevant. But to the world that we are in, I've always really prided myself on building as vast a network as possible and really doubling down on all those relationships and making sure that they were real, and knowing that like at some point in my life that we would pull from one another, and that like iron would sharpen iron, or I would know somebody that this person may needed to get in touch with, and vice versa, and that there was a real value and a currency in that, and not in like an inauthentic way. These were relationships that I cared about, people that I really enjoy spending time with. But I saw people that I admired, men and women in business that I wanted to know, and it's not as easy as it sounds, but I really sought out trying to get myself in their world and trying to get myself on their radar. And then I kind of took the same philosophy as I went into venture, is that I knew we didn't have more money than anybody out in Silicon Valley. And I knew that Kevin gave us a great deal of access, but at the same time, there was Steph Curry was there, and Joe Montana and Ronnie Lott and this person and that person. And just getting a door open, as we all know, is not exactly the answer to everything. So for me, it was like, well, how do we meet as many people? How do we learn and ask questions from as many people and start to look at some of the investments we made and not always look at them as what would my ROI be financially, but what am I getting out of aligning myself with this founder? What am I getting by aligning myself with this sector of business? Like, what am I going to learn from just investing in this company and this founder that I would never have been able to get?
Yep.
And it really worked because it just gave me more inspiration and more direction. It gave me visibility into things that people were doing that were going to be the unlock to some of the things that I was going to want to do down the road. And then, true to what I had done earlier in my life, I really wanted every founder, and I'm sure every founder in our portfolio wouldn't say this, but majority of them would say that I'm a true strategic investor. So if somebody hits me on Sunday morning from one of our portfolio companies, whether we hit them with a $25,000 check or $2 million check, and they say to me, we'd love to get in touch with so-and-so from the NBA, I'm just the kind of guy that does that right then and there. I follow through. And that really gives you earned value. And in this community of network and founder to founder relationship and deal flow, you have to be true to what you say you're going to do and follow it up and do the work.
Yeah, I like that. It's funny. I was having a conversation yesterday with a bunch of VCs, and they were trying to enter a very specific category, and it happens to be a category with sex. So, and it's a category from Call Her Daddy that I've spent a lot of time looking at, and I think there's interesting opportunities, but it was so academic. There were HBS people, and there were big university here people, and I'm like the smart quant girl people. And then I was like, sex on the internet is porn. So like, if you really do you want to have a viral, scalable business? And like, in my opinion, make porn for women. Like, why aren't we making porn for women? Make sexy, great female gaze porn. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. They didn't think that was so interesting, but it's like,
but that's because that, not to interrupt, but they wouldn't, because there's people that invest, there's people that have vision, and sometimes the people that are investing don't necessarily have vision, and I think that,
which is probably why they're investors.
Exactly. But I think that because I went to a college for a year. I don't think I have one credit, and I'm not proud of that. I'm actually quite embarrassed by it. But I knew that I wasn't like this Wharton grad, Blackstone native, like moved to Silicon Valley. But what I felt like I had was a good instinct and vision. And if you're investing, I mean, especially in early stage, you damn near are the founder in some ways, right? I'm not taking away from the founder, but you're seeing it at its infancy. So you have to envision it as well.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. I agree with that. I think you also get people. And I think that there's like, when you get street and you get people, it doesn't matter. You're an athlete, you're a hip hop star, you're a pop star, you're an internet blogger, you're a delinquent. You get it. Do you know what I mean? And I think that what I like about you guys, I don't think you can say you guys anymore, but what I like about you guys is that it's not academic, and it is more than, like, I find the celebrity athlete personality investing in X boring. I'm like, who fucking cares? They make so much money. They're not going to spend that much time on it. But I think you're a little bit of an X factor with KD, where the combination of the two of you, his attitude, his access, your attitude, your hustle, creates something really interesting. And I think I think founders are better for that. And then I also think, people in their careers, take a chance on the guy that dropped out of college. Take a chance on the girl who can't add. If they have the right DNA and personality and are willing to hustle, like, really good things can come out of that, and really good companies can come out of that.
Truly. I think that's like a lost kind of like people don't talk enough about when LeBron James has the foresight to put his friends in the positions that they were best like positioned to succeed in,
Totally.
right? For Kevin Durant to meet me through Wale in 2007. Granted, I always feel like I presented myself as an entrepreneur and a hustler, and I think people gravitate towards that in general, but Kevin took a big risk, you know, for Jay-Z to believe in the people around him and the people that he grew up with to build his infrastructure, you know, for you and Dave to believe in the people you surround yourself with, you know, that's a really understated quality of a leader and a CEO. And I don't think Kevin, you know, fully understands how appreciative at times I am, because, you know, like you said, the formula was not for Kevin and me to partner up. It was for Kevin to be at an agency and,
Yeah.
you know, and that was the model. And,
Yeah.
you know, for the ones that break it, I think there is a lot of incredible vision that comes with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's so interesting. I mean, I worked with LeBron. LeBron was smart where he had done a deal with Microsoft in 2000. I worked for Microsoft at the time, and I was on the LeBron team. I remember going to Cincinnati and staying in a hotel for legitimately $49 a night. And we met in the gym, and we met Gloria and Maverick, and all the horsemen were there. And I remember sitting outside of Steve Ballmer's office with Maverick, who was probably 17 at the time. Like,
Yeah.
maybe he was
That's
18.
crazy.
Loaded up in the Louis Vuitton, like the belt, the shoes, the bag. And then it's like a kid, you know? And you look at Maverick now, and it's like, he was such a good investment. He was such a good call. He was a great person for Steve Ballmer at Microsoft, running Microsoft at the time, to be connected with. He understood something Ballmer didn't. He had the trust of LeBron, which the, you know, former agency circuit never got. And then the idea of that, like, music is sport and sport is entertainment and entertainment is business, like that there's no rules with any of it. I love that. And I think that the more, when you get into that vortex, and I think for anyone in their career, if you can just find yourself in a vortex, all the while being like, what the fuck am I doing here? I'm not sure I deserve to be here. But in a vortex with people doing interesting things in interesting ways is awesome. Like Wale, like in my past life, had launched a music platform. Wale was on it, loved it. But I remember being at our Super Bowl party, I don't know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we could not get Wale to leave. It was a bunch of white kids, Stoolies, Dave and Dan, and Wale. And Wale was like 700 feet taller than anybody else, but just like hanging around like having the best time. Then we'd like go back to the house. Wale was there. Like he was, but he was like good people, right? Like I like these guys. It's an interesting conversation. It's a cool hang. They came from crazy different worlds. And I think your background as a manager, as a promoter, as an agent of like, all right, let's put these things together.
Yeah.
That is like life.
Yeah. Well, and that's life now, you know, so I think that's another reason why I've been fortunate to be able to have a network from all these different circles throughout all the different things that I've experienced. And hearing you talk about, you know, your meeting 20 years ago with Microsoft and just the names you're mentioning, it's the same thing. It's that like sweet spot you get into where some of like the knucklehead adventures over 20 years from when I like dropped out of school till when I was 40, that each one individually felt like, what was I doing? Like, where am I? Am I lost? Should I not be doing this? Like constantly questioning everything that I was doing. Was it going to get me to my ultimate goal? You know, and I don't even know if I knew what the goal was, but the goal was a certain level of regard and a certain level of feeling of success. And that's what it was really always is for me. And when you're doing it, there really is very few things in your kind of journey up where you're like, oh yeah, this is it. This is what's going to get me to the top. You're just like, what am I doing on this video set for 20 hours? Or like, you know, all of those moments. Then when you get there, you start to go, oh my God, like, I can tell the story about when I met Mav at 17, and then when Steve Ballmer was doing this, and then that's our experience, and then that's our network, and now we have all of these. And I don't think the formula, you know, connected back to that mentality. That wouldn't have worked. So it's like, it didn't matter if I knew all of these people, if the opportunities were only going to go to the senior partner at Blackstone, you know, and if they were only going to give it to a certain type of founder. I wouldn't have been able to infiltrate that. But with the world changing the way it has, and with these industries combining in the way that they did, and, you know, being that the pillars of what I've always worked on have kind of been in hip hop and in sports, that in itself, sitting at like the top of this, like this world that we're referencing, allowed me now all of a sudden to have a real value. Like now that, you know, commercial set I was on for 20 hours.
It was worth
when
it.
I was at, yeah, it's worth it. You know, I was on the Maybach music group tour buses through like college towns, jumping off to do commercials, and, you know, calling my wife with my newborn thinking like, she may not believe when I tell her now I'm going to own my own big monster company anymore.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't adding up, but it did. It really did, you know? And I think that's tough on the climb for people like us that aren't going to be in a program that you can point to and go, yeah, well, if you do this program, 20 people in front of me are billionaires, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have that.
No, and I don't think you would have done well in it. That's how I feel anyways, is that like, if you had laid out like, okay, A to B to C and the you shoulds and if then statements, like I can't do an if then statement. Like,
no.
And it's also, I think that's what the chaos of crypto, you know, just looking at your investment in Coinbase, like the chaos and volatility and uncertainty and suspectness of crypto is what makes it so interesting. And what I like in any career is like, I still don't know where I'm going. And I don't think you do either. And that's what's great about it, is you can feel grateful for the journey you've been on, for where you get to, the access that you have. I feel so grateful every day about our ability to create. I'm like, we are so gifted that we can create anything.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's going to amount to anything, but I think if more people felt like that, people would be happier, more fulfilled, and more interesting things would be happening.
Yeah, it's like how, you know, us presenting a 3 to 5 year plan is kind of the antithesis of how we got here. You know, like it's very hard for me to think along those lines, because now more than ever, especially, like the shelf life of what we say 6 months later doesn't even make sense. You know, like I was talking to a network today about a show. Very few of these things KD goes and does, which you would, but he did this like major talk show that'll be coming out on a streaming service. You can figure it out. And I thought it was, you know, it's been almost 8-9 months, and I'm trying to explain, like, I'm not quite sure you can count on Kevin feeling the exact same way he felt about what he said 8 or 9 months ago.
Yeah, totally.
And that's not a knock on him. It's just like, how are we able to forecast any of that in the business we built? I think what you can tell somebody clearly is like, what Barstool's done has earned the right for them not have to tell you where they're going to be in 3 to 5 years. That's right. Kind of how the way I look at it. Right?
100%. That's a great way to put it. And I agree with that. You know, I get asked that of like, what is the 3 to 5 year plan? Like, what's the EBITDA going to be? And I'm like, I have like higher. Like for sure higher. But then it's also good to be like, I had a conversation last night with someone who I really respect. I sit on a board with him, team owner in the NBA. And I also think it's good to get schooled. So like on one hand, like we feel pretty chesty. We've had a lot of success. We've gotten very big. We have a lot of access, blah, blah, blah. We feel independent. We feel like we're in control of our destiny. Like that to me is the most important thing for anybody in their life. But then it's also like, I had this call and, you know, he's like, I think you're just in a bunch of hobbies. And I'm like, I'm launching all these businesses and it's so great. And we're incubating this. And he's like, you just have a bunch of hobbies. Like, how are you turning your hobbies into businesses? And he just was hammering me on it. And I love that, because I was like, you know what? You're 30 years older than me. You've seen shit that I'll never see in my life. You've had more success. You have more money than I'll like ever hope to touch. And like, you're gifting me with like hey, what did he say? It's the core or the crust. He had a pizza analogy, which I was like, that's cute. But, you know, is it core or is it crust?
I like it though. I already get it.
Yeah, right? And I'm like, that's a good way to look at it. And I'm like, we're just making a lot of crust around here.
Yeah, well, I guess the only difference is the crust is better on pizza than
Definitely.
the core for most
I'm a
people.
huge, actually, if we can just take a small commercial break, I like the first bite at the tip. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like right at the end, and then the middle section, forget it, crust. Don't you agree?
And because you've done a perfect fold of the pizza, so that first bite of the tip.
Yeah,
is
you get
like
extra cheese. Yeah.
Yes. And then at that point, that whole, you're just like, when can I get done with this middle part?
Yeah, just get to the end.
Where it still has a little bit of pizza left.
Yeah, definitely. I also like to back end it. Well, I'll start with the crust and then dig the cheese off with the crust. Have you done that? That's another good one.
Yeah, of
you
course.
And I just don't like the middle.
You remake the pizza.
That's right.
You make your own.
Yeah, that's right. You and I just don't like the middle.
The cheese has melted into the pan. You take the crust, go back to like Gen Pop, where everyone else is doing it. Whatever cheese didn't make it, you just scoop it up.
Completely. It's like 90s. I was having this conversation. I think like Christina Aguilera dirty is like the look that women have right now. I'm like, we need to go back to Christina Aguilera dirty era. That's what they all.
By the way, I think Christina Aguilera is on her way back. I feel like we're about to have an Xtina moment.
That'd be amazing. I was down for it the first time. I'm here the second time. Like, let's go.
Let's go.
Rich,
I just want to say one thing. I just want to say one thing to what you just said about this person giving you feedback, pushing you, and how you still need to kind of make sure you have a healthy dose of that in your life, because that I didn't want to be, I don't want to ever misconstrue that. I am confident, but my curiosity and my humility at the same time, I do think I pay special close attention to. I have so many people that I call for conversations just like you had, right? Where you think what you're doing is the most important thing in the world. And you need someone to say to you, like, you're talking about your hobbies, like, what's your business, and it was hurtful for me earlier on. But when I realized that I had proved, some of my own doubts, because that wasn't them saying I didn't have a real business. That was them saying, I believe you can really build a business and you need to focus on where you're going and not the things that you worried about earlier on. But when I finally got over that, like, I agree with you. I embrace all of that. I had a moment during the pandemic where someone really close to me called me, was like, what the hell are you doing with Boardroom, man? You're screwing this whole brand up. You put up 3 interviews last night with different rappers. Like, you haven't even proven who you are. You're already expanding your conversation and no one even knows what you're talking about. You're trying to do some like screaming at me. And it took me about 2 minutes because I was ready to fight this person.
Yeah, you're ready to be like, shut the fuck up. Instinct one.
Yep. And it ended up being one of the most amazing inflection points in the growth of the brand. And
exactly.
Like, if I didn't listen, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. It's hard to, like, when you get that flash of heat, like, it's hard not to have the, like, who the fuck are you saying this to me?
Yeah.
But I think it's just that. I agree with that, which is, I was having this conversation last night. We were talking about Vince McMahon versus Gary Vee. Gary Vee, awesome, super accomplished, best marketer I've seen, so articulate, like, he can talk to small business people in a way no one else can. You cannot get a fucking word in edgewise with Gary Vee. He just talks incessantly. So there's no inbound feedback. You go to Vince McMahon, 77 years old, so soft-spoken, doesn't say much, just listens.
Yep.
And I was like, do you want to be Gary Vee or do you want to be Vince McMahon? I want to be Vince McMahon because it's like, he's so curious. He's like so humble. The guy is a titan, an inventor, a king, but he's so humble and almost just wide-eyed curious, like doesn't know. And it's like, which one everyone is a little bit of both. And it's like, when and how?
I'm definitely a little bit probably of both, maybe more to the side of Gary Vee, in that I think his brain is spinning in a trillion directions miles per hour because he's seeing so much opportunity. And when you see it and you're wired like we are, it's like you want to fast forward everything. You want to fast forward time.
Totally.
You want the meeting that you're trying to schedule. You wish it could happen tomorrow. Whereas Vince McMahon is probably sitting there like, I don't have the physical energy. My brain has started to slow down because I've already done it a few times. And you know what? Let me actually listen, because it's And I think that the amazing thing is, it's important though that the people like us, when they decide to speak, that we listen.
Yeah.
Because then they're choosing like less and less gems to offer you. But if you listen, it's like you said, it's the core and the crust. It's always those.
It's always those two things. I also think that Gary learns by talking. Gary is so hyper collaborative that it's the conversation that he learns from versus the Vince of it all is like, let me digest, I'll evaluate and judge, and then I'm going to come back to you with the thing. And it's so I think that's interesting.
True. Very true.
All right, Rich, we have to do this again. You're amazing. I'm such a fan.
Thank you. I am too. I'll come on whenever.
Okay, let's do this again because I feel like we didn't probably talk about anything you want to talk about.
No. I just wanted to talk. And by next time, I'll try to figure out if I can get the camera to actually face where I'm looking. Because it looks like I'm looking one way and somehow my face is the other way.
No, you look
great. I'm going to figure this out for next time.
All right, you figure it out next time. Enjoy the sweatpants. The teeth look great. Love the shades. Good luck with the investments, and we'll see you later.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye. All right. So big shout out to Rich. I'd like to do more with Rich. So thanks to Rich for joining the podcast. For adulting. So for adulting, we're going to talk about the theme of turning a hobby into a business. This has been a big trend during the pandemic. According to the New York Times, Yelp recorded nearly 100,000 business closures in the beginning of 2020, but also a 10% rise in new businesses selling baked goods during the same period. So small businesses were closing, big businesses were shuttering their locations, and entrepreneurs were starting to sell 10% more baked goods than they did before. Etsy, which is also a good indicator of small entrepreneurial creative businesses, saw a huge spike in small business sellers, nearly 50% throughout 2020. I think there's obviously a lot of enticing things about having a full-time job: benefits, security, coworkers, the chance or the semblance of a career. It's also incredible to be able to leave that corporate life for a project that you love. And there are a lot of things with that you need to think about. Number one, considering the money you'd have to spend to get the project off the ground. I think it's great to have a hobby. It can turn your hobby into a business, but you need to be realistic about what that's going to take, not only in terms of your time, but also in terms of product development. You may need to trademark something. You may need a patent. You've got to think about all of the intricacies in building the business itself. I had a friend who built a business in solar. It was so incredible to watch him do that, but it was also almost heartbreaking to see how much money that cost him and how long it took, because bringing his vision to life was dependent on so many pieces of the supply chain to see that come to fruition. The second thing you should do is to make sure you've tested out the product. You shouldn't launch a business on a whim. You should understand if your business has market fit. You should understand what people want, why people want it. You should have a good story around your product. And then you should also test it to see if you can actually make it sell. So it's a great idea to have a lemonade stand, but if no one on your street wants lemonade, or it's very cold outside, your product is probably not going to sell. That's the same of turning a hobby into a business. Always a great idea to write a business plan, everything from the company overview to what your marketing strategy would be and how you think that sales or traction can be gained month over month, week over week, and year over year. I wouldn't spend too much time getting caught into that, but you should have a sense of, hey, how long can I do this for? How much money do I need to be able to give my project a real run? And what's it going to take to make this thing take hold? And how will I know when I'm having success? Obviously, finding a social media presence is a great way and a super free way to find audience. And what I would say finally is, you've got to maintain some emotional distance with your hobby/business. One, I think it's easy to have a hobby, but when your hobby becomes a business, your relationship with that hobby changes, and you've got to be prepared for that. And then second, sometimes your hobby isn't going to be a great business, and it's not going to yield a living, or it's not going to drive the type of monetary results that you need or the type of success that you would want. And you have to be able to walk away. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck in that very scenario of just trying and trying and trying to make your hobby a business and not seeing it work. Speaking of turning your passion into a full-time job, here is a woman who turned her passion into a gig. All right, so for our Work Like a Girl segment, we are featuring an Indian woman named Falguni Nayar. She set her own goal of starting a company before the age of 50. She did just that. She's a billionaire. She had always wanted to be in business. She left her job in finance in 2012. Falguni launched a company called Nykaa, which is a beauty e-commerce company. What year did she launch it? She launched it at the age of 49, which is awesome. 3 months ago, it went public. It hit $7 billion in market cap, which is incredible. She became the first Indian woman to bring a unicorn company public. She told Fortune magazine that she wasn't ever afraid to be different. When people told her beauty couldn't work in e-commerce, she said she didn't care and stuck with it. She was confident in her ability to do the right thing and to build the right business every step of the way. Falguni Nayar is working like a girl. That's it for today's episode. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave us a rating, give us a review. You can DM us video questions on any platform. We'll try to feature as many in each show as possible. I've been doing Instagram Ask Me Anything, so you may see your question featured on my Instagram. You can watch this episode along with many others on our YouTube. Just search for Token CEO. And then if you haven't already, subscribe to Things You Missed by going to barstool.link/TYM. We'll see you back here next week.